This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
November 4th, 2019. 3 SUVs carrying members of the LeBaron family left a small town in Sonora, Mexico. Now they'll never get to their destination because La Linea just ambushed them in a brutal attack. These are cartel extortion methods, worse than death.
Come after us and we'll hang bodies up at noon in town as a warning, as a demonstration of who is in charge here.
December 16th, 2009 was the day everything came crashing down for one of Mexico's most dangerous drug lords, Arturo Beltran Leyva. After years of tracking him, the Mexican Navy finally found him hiding in a fancy apartment. When special forces stormed the place, a massive shootout breaks out as Arturo refuses to surrender. He's fighting back with grenades and bullets, but in the end, he's killed. One of the brave soldiers who lost their lives in that mission was Melquisedec Angulo Cordova. Now he's celebrated as a hero and buried with full honors just 5 days later. His death was tragic, but what came next was worse than anyone could have imagined. The cartel has a pattern. They don't just go after their enemies, but after their families as well. Arturo Leyva had learned this brutal tactic while working with another powerful drug boss, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Now you see, Arturo and his brothers had once worked closely with El Chapo and helped grow the Sinaloa cartel, but that alliance didn't last long. In 2008, Arturo's brother Alfredo was arrested. Arturo believed El Chapo had set him up, so he broke away and formed his own cartel. From that point on, Arturo made it his mission to show the world that he was top boss. He called himself El Jefe de Jefes, or Boss of Bosses, and launches a wave of violence across Mexico. His cartel controlled drug routes, smuggled weapons, laundered money, and murdered anyone who stood in their way. Communities lived in fear. Police were either bought off or killed. The government struggled to fight back, and the cartels became more powerful and more violent. That very night, while Melquisedec's family was mourning his loss, sicarios break into their house. They kill his mother, brother, sister, and aunt in cold blood.
His family became an example of the ruthless, savage ways of Mexican gangs. At least a dozen hitmen executed Cordova's mother, brother, sister, and aunt, storming into their home, spraying their living room and bedroom with bullets.
This was payback from the cartel, an act of pure cruelty meant to send a message. Mess with us, and your whole family pays. 1978, Hector Luis Palma Salazar, known as El Guero Palma, was arrested in the U.S. And while he was behind bars, far away from his home in Mexico, the Tijuana cartel made its move. Now, Palma had started his criminal career back in the 70s, working his way up through the dangerous world of drug smuggling. This guy was ruthless, smart, trusted by the top bosses. What broke him wouldn't be a rival with his gun, but betrayal from the people he loved the most. His wife, Guadalupe Lea Serrano, and his trusted friend, Rafael Clavel, turned against him. Clavel had seduced Palma's wife while he was in prison. Lea, used to the fancy lifestyle, followed Clavel and even took Palma's 2 young kids with her. Now, she also helped Clavel steal $7 million from Palma's hidden fortune. But Clavel here was working with the Tijuana cartel, and he had one cruel goal: to completely destroy Palma's life. Clavel killed Lea, chopped her head off, put it in a container of ice, and sent it directly to Palma in prison. What's in the box? But even that wasn't the worst part. Clavel then took Palma's 2 children and throws them off a bridge to their deaths. It was pure evil. That's how cartels operate when they want to make a statement. Oh, they don't just kill. They gotta make an example out of their enemies, so no one else dares to fight back.
This is for the record. Nita and 4 of my grandchildren are burnt and shot up.
November 4th, 2019. Another shocking day in Mexico's drug war. Early this morning, 3 SUVs leave a small town in Sonora. Inside were members of the LeBaron, Langford, and Miller families. American-Mexican Mormons headed to a wedding, but they never made it. Armed men from La Linea would open fire, thinking the families were enemies, or simply maybe just wanted to send a warning. Now, the first SUV is hit with bullets and explodes into flames. Ronita Miller LeBaron and her 4 children children, including twins, were burned alive inside. The second SUV was also attacked. Donna Langford and her 2 sons were killed. Some of the other children had survived by hiding in the bushes. But in the third SUV, Christina Langford Johnson would step out with her hands raised, begging these gunmen to stop. They shoot her, but her baby daughter survives. In total, 9 people are killed that day, 3 mothers and 6 children. The survivors, many of them hurt and terrified, managed to escape and get help. The attack was not random. The LeBaron family had spoken out against cartel violence before, and this had to be punishment. However, to better understand this, we gotta go back to 2008.
Y fue detenido en Galeana, Chihuahua, uno de los asesinos del líder mormón Benjamín Franklin LeBaron y de su cuñado Carlos Whitman. Fueron asesinados el 7 de julio cerca de la capital del...
That year, a member of the LeBaron family was kidnapped by the cartel, and a ransom of $4 million was demanded. The LeBaron family is pretty wealthy and well-connected, so the government steps in, and the boy was released without any ransom being paid. So everybody's pretty happy with that done and over with, and Benjamin Franklin LeBaron, the uncle of the boy who was kidnapped, was still pretty furious and decides that he's going to confront the cartels that operated in Chihuahua. This included the dreaded Sinaloa cartel and the Juarez cartel. All these activities caught the attention of Jose Enriquin Escaeda, who was a high-ranking member of the Ciudad Juarez cartel. And as you can guess, this wasn't going to be overlooked. July 7, 2009, some SUVs arrive at the residence of Benjamin LeBaron, and 15 men armed with guns hop out of the vehicles and demand that Benjamin step out of his house. Eyewitnesses reveal that these men broke into the house, beat up the family, and even assaulted Mrs. LeBaron. There was a lot of screaming and commotion coming from that house, so people were a little too scared to help. However, Carlos Whitman, who was an in-law to LeBaron and lived next to him, couldn't ignore his in-law's call for help. Unfortunately, his action only put him in trouble. Carlos and Benjamin are captured, taken away to a spot that was about a 2-hour drive outside of town. And both men are beaten and shot execution-style by the roadside, where their bodies are discovered hours later. In response, the police raided gangs in the area and arrested several members of the cartel suspected to be involved in the kidnapping and assassination of Benjamin and Carlos. Months later, the cartel boss, Jose Enriquin Escaeda, was also apprehended. It was this incident that made them a target of extortion for the cartel, and eventually, the deadly ambush. September 2nd, 2008, just after midnight, something terrifying happens in Culiacan, Mexico. 2 young men, both wearing white shirts, walk up to the main office of El Debate, the largest newspaper in the city of Sinaloa. Now, without hesitation, they throw 2 grenades at this building and run off into the darkness. The blast shattered the windows and left the office damaged, though luckily, no one was hurt. Soldiers quickly arrive at the scene, but the fear had already taken hold. This isn't your normal vandalism here. It's a threat to silence the press. The drug cartels of Sinaloa, known for power, wealth, and violence, were once again using fear to control what people could and couldn't say. For years, The Debate had been one of the few newspapers brave enough to report on cartels. Culiacan, after all, is the heart of Mexico's drug trade. It's the birthplace of some of the most dangerous drug lords in the country. Covering crime in this region is like killing yourself. And now, The Debate, with all its reach and reputation, had been forced to back down. Soon after that attack, the paper stops reporting on cartel activity altogether. Now, sadly, that's not a new story in Mexico. Journalists who write about organized crime have been attacked, threatened, and killed. Way back in May 2007, the newspaper Cambio in Sonora shut down after its grenade attacks and repeated threats. The editor said that the government failed to protect its 250 workers. That same year, in the state of Oaxaca, reporters at El Imparcial del Istmo resigned after 3 of their co-workers were murdered. They were simply too afraid to continue. Before that, in 2006, men with rifles and grenades storm into the offices of El Mañana, paralyzing 1 journalist in the city of Nuevo Laredo. Soon after that, the newspaper stops investigating drug trades altogether. That's the harsh reality. Mexican cartels silence the truth. Their message, simple. If a journalist tries to expose them, they're gonna get them. It's April 2021 in Nashville, Tennessee. Dennis Sanabria was working on a carpentry job, saw in hand, when his phone rang. The numbers from Mexico, and what followed changed his life forever. On the other end of this line, a man quickly tells him that his brother, David, and his niece, Ximena, were being held hostage. The kidnappers are members of the Gulf Cartel, and they're demanding $7,500 in 8 days if Dennis wants to see him alive. They're in a warehouse, being held captive in a border area controlled by the cartel. If Dennis doesn't pay, they're not going to make it out alive. The victims had their phone taken away from them and were forced to tell the kidnappers about anyone in the U.S. who could pay for their release. They're locked up for 2 days before being moved to a desert camp where tents are set up to hide the hostage site. Now here, they and other migrants are treated horribly. They're given barely enough food, just some rice, beans, and a small glass of water once a day. Now David, seeing how hungry his daughter was, would give her his food and go hungry himself. After that call, Dennis was stunned. For a week, he hadn't been able to contact his brother, and the smuggler who was supposed to help him had disappeared too. 2 hours later, David called again, pleading for Dennis to find the money. But each time Dennis said he couldn't pay, David suffered more. The kidnappers beat him badly. Little Ximena would cry watching her father bleed. As the days went on, the kidnappers grew more impatient. When the deadline for the ransom arrived, they killed the migrants who hadn't paid. David later revealed that they were chopped to pieces with machetes. All he could do was cover his daughter's eyes and ears, trying to protect her from the surrounding horrors. The surviving captives were then forced to eat the bodies of those who had been killed, a sick act of cruelty designed to cover up the evidence of what was happening. The nightmare continues. At night, the kidnappers perform strange and terrifying rituals, kneeling and praying to images of death, asking for power from the dark side. It's clear that these men weren't just criminals. They had a whole world created out of fear and madness. Desperate, Dennis would borrow money from his co-workers, friends, and family. He manages to raise $4,000, but it's not enough. The kidnappers want the full amount. David, now beaten and wounded, spoke to Dennis again, saying,
"If you can't do it, just leave me here. Let them tear me apart."
That was the last thing Dennis wanted to hear. That painful goodbye he feared would be the end of his brother. Out of options, Dennis's family sells cars, drains their savings, and begged for money from anyone who would help. They did everything they could, but it still wasn't enough. Dennis had already spent all his money paying the smuggler who had promised to bring David and Ximena to safety. But in the end, Dennis had no choice but to start begging for money on the streets of Nashville. He would prepare posters explaining the situation with his kidnapped brother and niece. He then put out several plastic cans to collect money, and in 1 week, he raises the additional $3,500. Eventually, he paid the full $7,500, and David and Ximena were released. But try to imagine just living the rest of your life with that kind of trauma. September 2014. 43 university students disappear in the southern state of Guerrero. Now they're last seen getting on buses in the town of Iguala. The Mexican government claims that a drug cartel with the help of local police killed the students and burned their bodies in a trash dump. But to date, a lot of mystery still surrounds their disappearance. According to the government, these kids were involved in a radical group that was demanding change, which is why they were targeted. However, many human rights groups and experts are questioning this story. They point out major issues with evidence and speculate that the government could have intentionally messed up the investigation. From the start, we have mistakes and inconsistencies. The idea that the bodies were completely burned at the trash dump doesn't add up, as experts argue that the temperatures needed to destroy human remains would have never been reached there. Now, these doubts grow over time as more people close to the case point out more flaws in the investigation. This whole thing's a mystery, and the official explanation is widely rejected. Recently, a well-known fire scientist conducted experiments on the case. Now, his findings are crystal. The government's story does not hold up. The temperatures needed to burn those bodies, as claimed by authorities, were simply not possible at that site. Now that finding directly contradicts the government's explanation. revealing a harsh reality about the vast control cartels have in Mexico. But it's not just the drugs, right? These guys engage in extortion, threats, and violence against innocent people, often without fear of getting arrested. The disappearance of 43 students is just one example of the horror these criminal groups cause. These cartels, working with corrupt police officers, have a firm grip on many parts of Mexico. December 2023. The state of Michoacán, Mexico. A local cartel had set up its own Wi-Fi network using makeshift antennas, and they demand that people pay to use it. The message is clear: pay or die. Now that's the latest strategy in their ongoing effort to control not just the drug trade, but other parts of daily life as well. The cartel, known as Los Viagras, had installed these narco antennas in several towns across Michoacán. They used stolen equipment to create a network that charged residents between 400 and 500 pesos a month, which is about $25 to $30. That's a lot for people who are already struggling. But this isn't your basic subscription plan. The cartel had threatened to kill anyone who refused to pay. While no deaths had been reported yet, people are trapped in a cruel situation where paying was their only option for survival. With over 5,000 people affected, this becomes a major moneymaker for the cartel. It's estimated the group is pulling around $150,000 a month from this scheme alone. The power held over these communities is staggering, as they use the internet, something so basic in today's world, as a tool to control people's lives. The Mexican authorities had recently seized the equipment used for those antennas, much of it bearing the logo of Telmex, one of Mexico's biggest internet providers. The cartel had stolen that gear, turning it into their own operation. They've only arrested one person so far, and the full scope was still coming into focus. This wouldn't be the first time cartels had used violence to extort money from people, but when the internet becomes a life or death situation, it just shows you how far they're willing to go.
And I just decided. It was a very hard decision for me, really painful. I have to leave my country.
It's December 9th, 2019, and Annabelle Hernandez's life changes forever. On this day, armed men broke into her home, even though she had security guards outside. Now luckily, she and her children weren't there. But again, the message was clear. No one is safe in Mexico when powerful drug cartels want you silenced. Annabelle Hernandez is a journalist who spent over a decade investigating corruption and exposing the brutal power of Mexico's cartels, knowing the risks every day. In 2008, Hernandez started digging into deep-rooted corruption within Mexico's federal police. 2 years later, she's a target of a hit ordered by someone with high authority in the country's government. The threats were real, and they were only getting more intense. Now, more than a decade later, she's been living under constant protection, with bodyguards keeping watch round the clock. This poor woman lives in fear. Hernandez has been constantly on the run from the cartel, always looking over her shoulders. But many consider her lucky. Others who have found themselves in this position haven't been so lucky. Since 2000, more than 150 journalists have been killed in Mexico, many of them tortured, mutilated, or simply disappeared without a trace. Take the case of Regina Martinez Perez, a respected correspondent for Proceso, a national investigative magazine. In April 2012, she was found beaten and shackled in her home in Veracruz, a notorious region dangerous for journalists. Regina was known for her hard-hitting reports on political corruption and drug trafficking. Official narratives say that it was a robbery, yet her colleagues knew better. It was an execution, and the message again was clear. How about in 2020? Julio Valdivia, a reporter for El Mundo, was found decapitated and dumped near the railway tracks in the same state of Veracruz. He also covered crime, an unforgivable offense in cartel-dominated territory. His body bore signs of torture, a grotesque warning. The cruelty of these killings is designed not to just punish, but to terrorize. What makes it even worse is how open these threats often are. Journalists like Miroslava Briash of La Hornada received numerous death threats before she was shot 8 times outside her home in Chihuahua in 2017. Now, she reported extensively on political ties to organized crime, Her killers were later tied to the cartel known as Los Salazar, a Sinaloa-affiliated group. Her final reporting had named candidates backed by the cartel in regional elections. She was silenced just before the ballots were cast. And then there's those who simply vanish. Sergio Gomez, a correspondent for La Opinión de Michoacán, was kidnapped in 2007 while leaving a concert. The next day, his body was found with signs of torture and strangulation. Another one covering organized crime. You know, in some cases, entire newsrooms are silenced. Not by court orders, but by grenades hurled through their office windows. April 2025. A terrible event shook the people of Puebla. A video started spreading across social media showing members of a dangerous group, Operativa Varedora, which is part of the infamous Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, claiming responsibility for the disappearance and brutal murder of 6 men. The bodies were found in the municipality of Cuautlancingo, with 5 of them dumped in a well-known area of Puebla City, and the 6th body wrapped in plastic. The video goes viral, showing 5 armed men wearing military-style gear and hiding their faces, standing in front of 6 young men who are kneeling, blindfolded, and terrified. They force the young victims to introduce themselves and confess to various crimes, like stealing motorcycles, robbing homes, and even dealing drugs. The men speak calmly, but the fear in the eyes of these young victims is pretty hard to miss. The killers from Operativa Varedora say they only target criminals and that their actions are meant to cleanse the area of bad people. However, that doesn't really hold up when you see the way they treated these young men. Now, the men in this video claim they don't kill innocent people, but their actions say otherwise. These young men who were murdered weren't dangerous criminals, but instead victims of a cartel that takes the law into their own hands. After the bodies were discovered, authorities confirmed that at least 3 of the 6 victims had been reported missing by their families. What makes this brutality more horrifying is the fact that these young men were humiliated and labeled as criminals, making their death even more sad. Now, the CJNG is one of the most powerful criminal groups in Mexico, always acting like they're above the law. They claim to be cleaning up the streets, but in reality, they're kinda just exploiting the poor and vulnerable to expand their control. The families of these victims now have to face not only grief of losing their loved ones, but also the harsh reality that they may never get justice for it. Despite a police operation being launched in the area connected with those killings, there are no clear answers. The poor people of Puebla are left wondering how deep the cartel's influence actually goes. And how much longer will this violence continue?
Pensé que pues ya me iba a morir ahí. Fue lo que pensaba pues. Aparte por la comida, yo vi morir como unos.
March 2023. The borders of Jalisco and Michoacán. Reports say that CJNG are forcibly recruiting young people and minors under the threat of violence. The victims are coerced into participating in violent encounters against rival groups and law enforcement. In one of the most recent attacks, dozens of laborers who were abducted in the town of Las Pilas, located in Santa Maria del Oro, Jalisco. The victims, many of whom were returning from their work at a greenhouse, were ambushed by 2 trucks with double axles. The men in the trucks ordered these workers out of their vehicles, blindfolded, and tied them up, and then they took them on a harrowing journey lasting an entire day. Eventually, the victims were transported to a CJNG training camp where they were held captive for several days. They were later brought to this small school where a member of the cartel identified as El Gallo introduced himself and made threats against their families if they attempted to escape. On the 3rd day of their captivity, the abducted individuals were given bulletproof vests and assault rifles, including AK-47s. They then take them up to the mountains and force them to engage in a violent shootout. Throughout this whole thing, the victims are denied necessities like food and water. Now, this group, primarily composed of people from rural areas, included teenagers. Despite the cartel's promise of a weekly payment of 4,000 pesos, these victims were forced into soldier-like uniforms and subjected to horrific conditions. One of the victims, a young man who had previously worked as a paramedic in his hometown, seized an opportunity to escape when cartel members were distracted in a shootout. He flees down a ravine and wanders until he gets lost. Finally, he finds the authorities and demands that his family be freed from the cartel's threats. January 2023, a taco vendor well known in the town of Caborca in Sonora for selling food in the Plaza de Armas was attacked in broad daylight. A group of sicarios stop his car, drag him out, and beat him right there on the street for his refusal to pay the extortion that criminals in the area demand from local vendors. This wasn't hidden, it happened out in the open for everyone to see. The message is, if you don't pay, you suffer. The cartels like making examples out of people publicly, using violence as a warning. But the most disturbing part would be that authorities did nothing. No arrests, no official response, no protection offered to vendors like this poor man. The silence speaks volumes. And again, it shows you how powerful these criminals are, and how powerless many people feel in return. In October 2023, a disturbing video starts circulating the troubled state of Guerrero, Mexico. A truly heartbreaking scene where a boy named Angel Barrera Millan was barefoot, hands tied, and sitting amongst a group of kidnapped local merchants. These people had been taken earlier that month while traveling between the towns of Chilapa and Quetzaltenango. They're being held by one of Guerrero's most feared criminal groups, Los Ardillos. In this video, Angel is clearly scared. He's forced to speak, say things that seem kinda made up, likely written for him by his captors. And he claims he's working for a rival gang, Los Lacos, and even mentions that his brother is a commander. He's talking about being sent to spy on people in their homes, gather information, and to watch the National Guard. But this is all a lie. This is about fear. The message Los Ardillos is putting out there is simple.
We're in charge, and no one is safe, not even children.
That's a terrifying reality that people of Guerrero have to live with today. Cartels like Los Ardillos rule towns through fear, violence, and control. They kidnap to make a statement. They couldn't care less about money. They use videos to scare people. Rival gangs to local families, shopkeepers, farmers, whoever. And in their hands, even a young boy becomes a tool to send a brutal warning. Behind this terrible act lies a broken system. Guerrero had been struggling with poverty for a while, a weak government, and corrupt police. Many towns like Chilapa and Quetzaltenango are now caught in the middle of a deadly war between Los Ardillos and Los Lacos. The real victims here are definitely not the gangs, but the poor people who just want to live their lives, merchants, children, all kinds of families, constantly trapped in fear. The extortion here is relentless. Los Ardillos force local businesses to pay them just to keep the doors open. If someone refuses, they disappear. If they pay, they're still at risk. So no one is truly safe. September 2006, Michoacan, a night that should have been filled with music and dancing, turned into something horrifying. Around 20 armed guys storm into a crowded nightclub to send a very chilling message. At the center of the dance floor, they dumped 5 human heads. Just like that, the club turns into a nightmare. People were screaming, freezing in fear, or just ran for the exits. This was a performance designed to terrify everyone watching. Now, beside the heads was a note claiming that this was divine justice, a message signed by La Familia, or the family. According to this note, they didn't kill for money nor target women or innocents. They claimed that only the guilty die by their hands. To them, this ain't murder. It's justice. Their way. But no one really saw any kind of justice. What stood out was cruelty and violence, carried out in public for maximum fear. Officials later said that it was likely the work of the Zetas cartel, the group formed of elite soldiers who had turned to crime. They were trained in war, skilled with weapons, and took that to run drug routes, collect protection money, and eliminate anyone in their path. It wouldn't be surprising if it was the Zetas. With that military discipline and total lawlessness, the attack was pretty shocking, but it was only the beginning. October 2021. The Tijuana Police Chief's office. A human head is stuffed in a black plastic bag. Along with it is a note. It's from the Tijuana cartel, warning the new police chief, Rafael Vasquez, to stay out of their way. They accused him of helping their enemy's smuggling operation in the Sinaloa cartel. You see, Tijuana is a key hub in the drug trafficking route to the US, and it consistently ranks among the top 10 most violent cities in the world. The majority of that violence is cartels running around fighting for control. So whether the accusation against the police chief was true or not really didn't matter to the cartel, because they just want to send a message, right? Through violence and fear. The note would promise Tijuana would suffer because of the chief's actions. It was a clear threat, not just to him, but to the entire city. These cartels take on whole neighborhoods, scare off any kind of honest cop out there, and bend the law to their will. Doesn't matter if a police officer is corrupt or clean. Doesn't change a thing, because in the eyes of the cartel, anyone just not working for them is a target.